God, I hate the Vikings. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast. The podcast, I don't even know what we are. You don't gotta be a Packers fan. It sure does help, or does it? Because we just lost. I'm Tom. I don't know what's going on. Grossi. God, I hate the Vikings so much. So much I hate the Vikings, but the Green Bay Packers unfortunately losing to the purple incarnation of Satan with a score of 27-25. And oh boy, there is a lot to talk about because the Green Bay Packers, they looked awful until that fourth quarter. They couldn't get anything going on offense. They couldn't get anything going on defense. And I don't think this is all doom and gloom. The Packers are still in the playoffs. I think there's still some optimism to pull from this game. But the performance and that team was not ready to go today. Those injuries definitely were a difference maker. But overall, the Packers, they just couldn't get anything done on the field. And ultimately, the Vikings, they took advantage of way more opportunities and they were able to come away victorious. This is the first time since 2017 that the Vikings have swept the Packers, and now the Packers have been swept by both the Vikings and the Lions this year, so this really did not feel too good. Devontae Wyatt and Zane Anderson left that game with concussions. On top of that, as we mentioned before about the injuries, there was no Christian Watson, no Quay Walker, no Jair Alexander, and no Evan Williams, and you definitely saw their absence play out in the secondary because Sam Darnold and the Vikings, they diced us up. And taking a look at this game, the first half alone, the Packers only scored 3 points. They elected to go for it on fourth down and not kick a field goal, which would have made a difference in this game. But ultimately, it was a turnover on downs. And for the Packers on the first drive, things looked like they were going pretty well early on. Josh Jacobs unfortunately put the ball on the ground, who's been having a great season this year. But unfortunately, an ill-advised and ill-timed fumble allowed the Vikings to get it quickly, and they never really looked back. Jordan Love on the day was 19 for 30, 185 yards, 1 touchdown, was sacked 3 times, and the offense never really got into a rhythm, and part of it was because the lack of protection. There was just nothing going on. It was so bad that heading into the fourth quarter, Jordan Love had 64 yards total, and on one drive had 68 yards. He literally more than doubled his total yards in one drive, and again, gotta give some credit to that Vikings defense because they came ready to play today. Josh Jacobs had nearly 70 yards and 1 touchdown. I mentioned the fumble before. Romeo Doubs, 7 for 88. Kraft was 2 for 53. And it seems like for the Packers, because this was a very similar game to the first game against the Vikings, in which they started out super duper slow. They came back at the end, made it competitive, but ultimately it was too little too late. And when it comes to the playoffs, the Packers cannot have these slow starts. The good news is the Packers should be getting healthier and they should get guys back like Watson, like Quay, like Jair, and Evan Williams, which will make a very big difference. But ultimately today, there was really just no excuse for how poorly the Packers played. And on top of that, the Packers had 7 penalties today, which killed them. I know there was 1 offsides penalty on that field goal attempt by the Vikings that they missed, even though that offsides was, I don't know where that was to be found. And that wound up swinging the game 3 points in the Vikings' favor, which ultimately made a difference in a 2-point game. But I'm not going to blame the refs here because the Packers had ample opportunities. Hell, if they went for a field goal instead of going for it in the first half, it could have been a different game as well. Packers had plenty of chances to score on this team, and they just did not get it done. Taking a look at the Packers defense, it was a tough day for them. They had 1 total sack. The pass rush was almost non-existent against Sam Darnold. A huge credit to their offensive line. Did have an interception from Carrington Valentine, who fumbled that ball, but thankfully the Packers fell back on top of it. But Sam Darnold, he had a career high in yardage, went 33 for 43, 377 yards, had 3 touchdowns on the day, 1 interception, and 1 sack. Aaron Jones was held under 50 yards, and we held the Vikings to under 70 yards total. So I will say the good news is the Packers' run defense continuously looks good, and that will hopefully serve them well in the postseason. Justin Jefferson was their leading receiver, 8 for 92. Naylor was destroying us in the first half, 5 for 81, including a touchdown where he was wide open. Addison also had a diving touchdown, went 6 for 69 with a score. And ultimately for the Packers, it was just an infuriating game. Both the offense and defense were just struggling all day. The offense wound up putting some things together in that fourth quarter. And for the Packers, unfortunately, this was a tough game to lose because looking at the postseason, this puts them in a pretty precarious spot. They are currently 11-5 right now. And the Commanders, they're sitting at 10-5 with a game to play on Sunday Night Football against the Falcons. If the Commanders win and have the same record as the Packers, the Commanders have the tiebreaker, which means that the Packers would move down to the 7 seed. So Packers fans, you better be rooting for the Atlanta Falcons tonight and or hoping that the Commanders lose next week and the Packers are able to knock off the Bears, because otherwise the Packers are going into the postseason as a 7 seed and are likely going to be facing the Philadelphia Eagles, which will be a very tough game. Meanwhile, for the Vikings, they're going to be going toe-to-toe with the Lions for not only the number 1 seed, but also for the NFC North next Sunday. I imagine that's going to be Sunday Night Football, which should be an excellent game. And I know this pains me to say, but I do have to give credit to the Vikings. Yes, that game got close at the end, but Sam Darnold, he put together a really damn good game, carving up the Packers secondary, and their defense, they got after Jordan Love and did not allow him to get into a rhythm all freaking day until the very end of that game. And while it did get close, and I'm happy that the Packers at least put up a fight, it is still super disappointing. And I know there's already plenty of folks on the internet that, oh, the Packers are frauds, they can't beat winning teams, but at the end of the day, the important thing is that whether it's the 7 seed or the 6 seed, the Packers have already locked up a playoff spot. I would love for them to hold on to the 6 seed. I think that's a much easier path to the Super Bowl, but ultimately the Packers cannot show up like they did today against the Vikings, against other playoff teams, or otherwise it is going to be a very short visit to the postseason. But at the end of the day, I do think the Packers can play much better than the performance they put on the field. Got to give a lot of credits to the Vikings. They are a very good football team this year. And even though it pains me so, them against the Lions should be peak football. And hopefully on Sunday Night Football next week, the Packers have to take care of business against the Chicago Bears. Definitely not the kind of game that you want heading into the postseason, but at least we're there. Let's see what happens when we get to the dance, whether it's the 6 seed or the 7 seed. And hopefully we put this loss behind us and we'll have an opportunity to avenge some of those losses in the postseason. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. You know, I saw me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at Tom Grossi Comedy, all social media, see down below. A big shout out and thank you to all the Patreon and YouTube members for supporting this channel. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go. I do hate the Vikings.
Yeah.